The grey February morning in 1935 was bitterly cold when Robert Watson Watt stood in a muddy field near Daventry, watching a Handley Page Hayford bomber drone overhead at exactly the scheduled time. At 43 years old, Watson Watt was a Scottish meteorologist and physicist who had spent the previous decade studying how radio waves could detect thunderstorms. Now he was about to demonstrate something that most scientists thought impossible: detecting aircraft using reflected radio waves. "Are you getting a signal?" Watson Watt called to his assistant, Arnold "Skip" Wilkins, who crouched beside a receiver connected to a cathode ray oscilloscope. "Yes," Wilkins shouted back, excitement breaking through his normally reserved demeanour. "The trace is jumping every time the aircraft passes through the BBC transmitter beam. We're detecting it, Robert. We're actually detecting it." Watson Watt felt his heart racing as he watched the oscilloscope screen. For months, the British Air Ministry had been pressing scientists to develop a death ray that could shoot down enemy bombers with radio waves. Watson Watt had told them such a weapon was impossible with current technology, but he had suggested something else: using radio waves not to destroy aircraft, but to detect them at long range, providing early warning of approaching raids. The Air Ministry had been sceptical. Radio detection and ranging, which would later be shortened to the acronym radar, seemed like science fiction. But they were desperate. Germany was rearming under Hitler, building new bombers that could reach Britain in under an hour from German bases. Without warning, London and other cities would be defenceless against air attack. This field demonstration at Daventry was Watson Watt's proof of concept. By using the BBC's powerful shortwave transmitter as a radio source and positioning a receiver nearby, he could detect aircraft by the disturbance they created in the radio field. The bomber passing overhead at 6,000 feet was generating a clear signal on the oscilloscope, undeniable evidence that radio detection worked. Within days, Watson Watt received approval and funding to develop a working radar system for air defence. He established a research station at Orfordness on the Suffolk coast, assembling a team of scientists and engineers to turn his laboratory experiment into an operational military system. The challenges were immense. Laboratory detection of a single aircraft flying a predetermined course was one thing. Reliably detecting multiple aircraft at various altitudes and distances in all weather conditions was quite another. Watson Watt's team had to develop high-power transmitters, sensitive receivers, directional antennas, and display systems that operators could actually use in real time. By June 1935, the Orfordness station could detect aircraft at ranges up to 40 miles, far enough to provide useful warning time. But 40 miles wasn't enough. Watson Watt calculated that detecting incoming bombers at 100 miles or more would give Fighter Command the 15 to 20 minutes needed to scramble interceptors and climb to altitude before the raiders reached their targets. Enter Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, appointed Commander-in-Chief of the newly formed RAF Fighter Command in July 1936. Dowding was 54, a taciturn officer who had learned to fly in 1913 and commanded squadrons in World War I. He understood aviation, and he understood the fundamental problem facing Britain, the bomber threat. "Gentlemen, the bomber will always get through," Dowding told his staff at Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory, echoing the famous declaration of former Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin. "That's what everyone believes. Our task is to prove them wrong. We need to detect incoming raids before they reach our coast, calculate their strength and heading, and direct our fighters to intercept them with maximum efficiency. Watson Watt's radio detection system is the key." Dowding became radar's champion within the RAF. He pushed for rapid expansion of the system, for integration with Fighter Command's operations, for training personnel to use it effectively. Under his direction, the experimental station at Orfordness evolved into Chain Home, a network of radar stations covering Britain's vulnerable east and south coasts. The chain home stations were unlike anything built before. Each consisted of 4 350-foot steel transmitter towers, among the tallest structures in Britain, with transmitting antennas strung between them. Nearby stood 4 240-foot wooden receiver towers arranged in a square, with receiving antennas that could detect reflected radio pulses from aircraft up to 200 miles away. Flight Lieutenant Edward Fennessy was among the first RAF officers trained to operate chain home equipment. In 1938, at 26 years old, Fennessy reported to the newly constructed Bawdsey Manor Station, the first operational chain home facility, for what he thought would be a brief technical course. "This equipment will win the coming war," the instructor, a civilian scientist named A.P. Rowe, told Fennessy's class on their first day. "Not with guns or bombs, but with information. Every minute of warning we can provide is worth a squadron of fighters. Your job is to translate radio pulses into intelligence that Fighter Command can use." Fennessy learned to interpret the strange green traces on the cathode ray oscilloscope screens. A spike indicated a radar echo, an aircraft reflecting radio pulses back to the receiver. The horizontal position of the spike indicated range. The height of the spike indicated signal strength, which correlated with the number of aircraft. By comparing signal strength from different receiving antennas, operators could estimate the bearing of incoming raids, but estimating aircraft altitude was problematic. The chain home system could detect targets up to 200 miles away, but height-finding accuracy was poor. Operators might be off by thousands of feet. This was critical information that fighter pilots needed to intercept effectively. The solution came through a combination of trigonometry and trial and error. By comparing the signal strength at different antennas and using mathematical calculations, operators could estimate altitude within acceptable margins. It required skilled operators who understood both the equipment and the mathematics, but by 1939 the system was working. By September 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, 20 chain home stations were operational, covering the coast from Southampton to the Scottish border. Each station was manned 24 hours a day by RAF personnel, mostly Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WWF, members who operated the equipment, while male officers supervised and coordinated with Fighter Command. Corporal Margaret Redmond was one of these WAF operators, assigned to the Poling Chain Home Station in Sussex in early 1940. At 22, Redmond had been a telephone operator in civilian life, work that had prepared her for the intense concentration required to monitor radar displays for hours at a time. Contact bearing 110 degrees, range 140 miles, strength 20-plus aircraft, Redmond reported to her supervisor one morning in July 1940. This was during the early phase of what would become the Battle of Britain, and German reconnaissance flights and small raids were probing British defences daily. The information flowed through the Dowding system, the integrated command and control network that linked radar stations, observer corps posts, fighter command headquarters, and individual sector stations. Within minutes, the contact Redmond detected was plotted on a large map table at RAF Uxbridge Sector Station, where controllers wearing headphones pushed coloured markers across the map, tracking the raid's progress. "Scramble 43 Squadron," ordered Squadron Leader Anthony Norman, watching the plot develop. "Vector them to intercept at Angels 15, 15,000 feet altitude." This was how the Dowding system was supposed to work. Radar provided early warning and initial tracking. The Observer Corps, thousands of civilian volunteers with binoculars and plotting tables, took over once raiders crossed the coast, and radar coverage became unreliable. Sector controllers directed fighters to intercept based on real-time information from both sources. But when the Battle of Britain began in earnest in July 1940, the system faced its first real test. The Luftwaffe was the largest and most experienced air force in the world, with 2,600 aircraft available for operations against Britain. Fighter Command had only 640 fighters and 1,400 pilots. Without the advantage of radar and the Dowding system, the RAF would have been overwhelmed within weeks. Oberleutnant Werner Mulders led his Jagdgeschwader 51 fighter Gruppe across the English Channel on August 12, 1940, escorting a formation of Dornier bombers targeting British radar stations. At 27, Mulders was already an ace with 25 victories, and he understood the strategic value of the tall steel towers he could see along the British coast. "Those towers are their radio direction finding stations," Mulders told his pilots during the briefing. "Intelligence believes they can detect our aircraft at long range. If we destroy them, the British will be blind. They won't know we're coming until we're overhead." The Luftwaffe struck multiple chain home stations that day: Pevensey, Rye, Dover and Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. The attacks were partially successful. Ventnor was knocked offline for nearly 2 weeks, and several other stations suffered damage. But the Germans made critical mistakes. First, they underestimated the robustness of the steel tower structures. High-explosive bombs designed to destroy buildings were less effective against open steel frameworks. Many bombs passed straight through without detonating, or exploded harmlessly near the towers without causing serious damage. Second, they didn't follow up. After the August 12 attacks, Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring ordered his forces to focus on airfields and aircraft factories instead of radar stations. His intelligence staff had reported that the attacks weren't having significant effects, and Göring believed radar wasn't as important as destroying RAF fighters on the ground. This was the Luftwaffe's greatest strategic mistake of the entire Battle of Britain. Göring failed to understand that radar wasn't just a minor technical advantage, it was the foundation of Britain's entire defence system. Without it, Fighter Command would have been forced to fly constant patrols, exhausting pilots and aircraft, while German bombers struck undetected through gaps in coverage. At Bentley Priory, Air Chief Marshal Dowding watched the plot board during a major raid on August 15, 1940, a day the Luftwaffe designated as Eagle Day, intended to destroy Fighter Command through overwhelming force. Nearly 500 German aircraft crossed the Channel in multiple waves, attacking airfields across southern England. "Sir, we're tracking 6 major formations," reported his senior controller. "Chainhome is providing excellent coverage. We've had 15 minutes warning on every raid so far." "Good," Dowding replied tersely. "Are our squadrons positioned correctly?" "Yes, sir. We're vectoring them to intercept based on the raid plots. The system is working exactly as designed." And it was. Throughout that day, RAF fighters met German bombers and their escorts with surprising accuracy. The Germans had expected to catch the RAF on the ground or scattered in small numbers. Instead, they found concentrated opposition at each target, squadrons scrambled at the right time, climbing to the right altitude, positioned to intercept exactly where and when needed. The cost was heavy on both sides. The Luftwaffe lost 75 aircraft on August 15th. The RAF lost 34. But the critical outcome was that Fighter Command remained operational, its airfields functioning, its radar network intact. The German plan to destroy the RAF in a single day had failed, and it had failed because radar gave the British the ability to respond efficiently to every attack. Pilot Officer Geoffrey Wellham was 20 years old when he flew his Spitfire from RAF Biggin Hill on September 15, 1940, the day that would later be celebrated as Battle of Britain Day. Wellham had been in combat for 6 weeks, flying 2 or 3 sorties daily, watching friends die, pushing through exhaustion and fear, because there was no alternative. "Red section, this is Beetle," his radio crackled. "Vector 110, climb Angels 20. Bandits inbound, estimated 50+. This was the voice of the sector controller at Biggin Hill, directing Wellham's squadron toward an incoming German formation detected by radar at Pevensey. The controller knew the raid's position, altitude, strength, and heading before it even crossed the coast. He could vector fighters to intercept with precision impossible without radar. "Tally-ho!" Wellham called as he spotted the German formation ahead and below. Dornier and Heinkel bombers surrounded by Messerschmitt fighters. Within seconds, the sky erupted into a swirling dogfight, aircraft turning, diving, firing, some trailing smoke, others exploding. But what Wellham couldn't see, what no pilot could see, was the larger picture that radar and the Dowding system revealed. The September 15th raid wasn't one formation, but several, attacking London in waves. At Bentley Priory and sector stations across southern England, controllers watched the plot boards and directed squadrons to intercept each wave in turn, concentrating force at the critical points, managing their limited fighter resources with maximum efficiency. By the end of September 15th, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft, an unsustainable rate of attrition. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Celian, the planned invasion of Britain, indefinitely. The Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority, and without it, invasion was impossible. The Battle of Britain would continue through October as the Luftwaffe shifted to night bombing, the Blitz. But the daytime battle for air supremacy was won. Radar hadn't won it alone. British pilots' courage, Spitfire and Hurricane performance, and German tactical mistakes all contributed. But radar had been the foundation, the technology that made everything else possible. After the war, Air Marshal Sholto Douglas, who succeeded Dowding as Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command, wrote, "The Battle of Britain might never have been won if it were not for the radar chain. It was the heart of the whole air defense system." Hermann Göring, when interrogated after Germany's surrender, admitted, "We didn't understand how important those towers were. Our intelligence told us they were just radio stations, not worth prioritizing. If I had known what they really did, I would have destroyed every one of them before attempting to invade Britain." Robert Watson Watt was knighted for his contribution to Britain's victory. He continued working on radar development throughout the war, helping develop airborne interception radar that eventually defeated the night bomber offensive, and precision radar for ground attack aircraft. He died in 1973, age 81, having lived to see radar become fundamental to aviation, navigation, weather forecasting, and astronomy. The chain-home towers stood until the 1950s, when they were finally dismantled as obsolete. A few sections remain as monuments, at RAF Neatishead, at Bawdsey Manor, at Dover, reminders of the secret weapon that gave Britain the edge when it needed it most. The operators who staffed the stations, the WAF women who watched the screens through long night shifts, the scientists who developed the technology, the controllers who interpreted the data, none became household names. Their contribution was classified for years after the war ended, and by the time it was declassified, public attention had moved on. But in the summer of 1940, those towering steel structures along Britain's coast, the strange pulses of radio waves they transmitted, and the green traces on cathode ray screens they produced, were as important as any Spitfire or Hurricane. Radar won the Battle of Britain before the first shot was fired by ensuring that when shots were fired, RAF fighters were in the right place at the right time to fire them. That was the secret that changed history, not a weapon that destroyed, but a system that informed, that transformed radar pulses into intelligence, intelligence into strategy, and strategy into survival. The bomber didn't always get through. Radar made sure of that.